I'm really excited to introduce Kristen Snowden. She's a therapist, a coach, and an author of Life Anonymous. It's basically the 12-step book for everybody. She has the most amazing YouTube channel, which has videos on anything that you guys are thinking about. She covers it and she explains it in perfect sense. And I love her. And she also does workshops, and you're laughing at me, workshops, Brene Brown workshop. I took it with her. It was amazing. So I'm going to pass it over to Kristen, and she's going to tell you the topic that she's going to cover today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. That was a very generous introduction. I appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most, what I call the heavy hitters. There's a couple of heavy hitters when we're dealing with betrayed partners and kind of the falling out, the stuff that they have to process and heal from and get through to get to the other side. I'm going to talk about grief, loss, and the process, the kind of sometimes inconceivable process of moving towards forgiveness. This is one of the three heavy hitters, like I said, that I find universally present in every betrayed partner's journey. The first most common thing is obviously the trauma part, the betrayal trauma. It's understanding that being betrayed by your partner's addiction, infidelity, emotional manipulation, lying, etc., is indeed received in your body as trauma. A second piece is shame. So, as many of you say often, I understand that the addict has shame and that's what perpetuates the cycle. But every person who has a desire to be loved and connected with the community and seeks approval or validation from other humans around you, as long as you have that drive and desire, you will also have an equal opposing force always present that's called shame. And it's that story, that little creeping, annoying story we say in our head that's saying, am I not enough? Is this too annoying, too much, talks too much, has too many emotions, feels too much? Do I have value? Do I have worth? Am I perceived as valuable to other people? So there's trauma and shame, and then this subject that we're talking about, which is grief and loss. Now, grief and loss occurs anytime there is any felt loss that exists. It can be very, very real and tangible, like you lost a loved one, there was a breakup. But many of you who've discovered your partner's betrayal and might still be in the relationship, there is still a great deal of grieving and feelings of loss and longing that you're going through. So let me just give you some definitions. Grief and loss occurs when there's any kind of sense of loss, something that we knew, we loved, we counted on, we believed in, is now gone. And we feel an uncertainty about how to move forward in this new reality without this one thing or multiple things. Why we have to talk about grief and loss when we're talking about our journey towards betrayal, trauma, healing is that if this loss isn't honored, given the attention that it's due, that gaping hole inside you that was created by the loss and longing will just grow larger. The problem that I find with grief is that it's such a messy emotion. So many of us grieve very differently. A family system could lose a person, one person inside the family system, and every single person who knew him or her would grieve and respond differently. So the process is very unique. And we tend to judge, we put a lot of judgment around how one should respond. You know, an ongoing joke, although it's not funny in the therapy world, is that for the diagnosis of bereavement, which is grief, You're allowed 3 months to be sad after you lose something. And then it like transitions into like, well, you're just depressed. And that is kind of a perfect symptom of the way our particular society handles messy emotions. We want to slap a timetable on it, throw some, oh, these are the symptoms you should be showing in this way and this pathway. You're doing it the right way, you're doing it the wrong way. Can't you just really, we throw platitudes at people. There's a silver lining, just, deal with it. It's not as bad as fill in the blank. And that is the unfortunate way that much of society handles grief and loss. So, as you can imagine, not only are all of you who are dealing with betrayal trauma of these heinous acts that your partner did, unbeknownst to you, there's not just this like fear of telling people what your partner was capable of doing or being, but there's this extreme hesitation to be open and honest and vulnerable about the losses that you're experiencing. But they are so very real, and they have to be acknowledged and shared with other people. And we'll be talking about that more soon. So the other day, in one of my betrayed partners groups, I was running a grief group, and they all shared just some lists of some things that they are grieving, that they feel like they lost due to their partner's betrayal. And here were just some of the themes of loss of safety and security in so many facets and areas of their life, from their relationship with their partner to their relationship with everybody else, their role in relationship as a parent, as an employee, as an employer, their financial security and their fear. So loss of safety, of fear of when is this going to happen again? If my partner's always struggling with addiction, this dealing with the fact that I can never just assume that he or she is going to stay on the straight and narrow. There's grief over the loss of their instincts and intuition due to being lied to, manipulated, gaslighted, kind of told that it's pitch black outside when they're looking at the sun and they know there's sunlight, and that there's something that just doesn't make sense. Loss of their memories, of how the framework of the way they viewed their memories are now muddied and soiled and ruined. So memories of how they thought their family was, what their partner was, loss of confidence in themselves, in their own decision-making process, but also confidence in the way they look, in their sexuality. There's a lot of abuse and shame in their physical bodies and sex due to the nature of the betrayal trauma. Loss of their ability to enjoy things that used to bring joy. So there was a lot of people talking about, Mother's Day has now been soiled, our anniversary, because he or she was acting out at various anniversaries. Things that used to bring me joy, our holidays, the holiday season is upon us, and many of you are in a current state of grief of what you thought holidays meant to you, but then you've now found out that your partner was acting out during holidays, sneaking around, maybe gifts that he or she bought were also bought for affair partners, etc. Music, loss of joy in music or shows or travel, locations, restaurants, because they are now associated with your partner's acting out behaviors or maybe some disclosures that you've gotten. Loss of what's normal, like, what do relationships look like? I don't even remember what I looked like before I found everything out. I don't remember what it felt like to feel normal. What should a partner be like? What does love look like and feel like? How am I perceived by others? How do I perceive myself? There's loss of that orientation. And then the general just loss of hopes and dreams of what you thought your life would look like, what you thought your relationship would look like, what you thought your later years in life would look like. And then obviously if there's divorce or deciding to separate, there's that true loss too of the marital unit, the family unit, and needing to kind of reinvent holidays and the idea of what family looks like. We have to go through this messy, messy process of identifying grief and loss and kind of speaking it and owning it, because you have to eventually later on, not now, but make meaning about all of it on your own. As you write these things down, acknowledge them, speak them to healthy, safe witnesses, therapists, or community friends that understand what you're going through. Slowly but surely, that story of loss kind of becomes absorbed into you, right? It's not like you feel like it's an environment that's swallowing you whole, all that loss and grief and disorientation, but it's just a part of your story, not all of you, a part of your identity, but not all of you. And you get it absorbed into the rest of you. So it never goes away. The process of grief and loss healing is similar to a lot of the healing process with like shame and trauma, which is it's all about integration. It's all about acknowledging that it does indeed exist. This is what you're going through. Um, and that it needs to be kind of absorbed into the rest of your story. Let me help you understand that by saying your brain is like a bento box. It likes things to be organized. And if you don't identify that with your prefrontal cortex, your more executive functioning systems, it will pick out random details and tell you what is good and bad and wrong and right. So you have to take the time to say, okay, these are the things that I'm grieving. This is what I'm struggling with. Name it. I always encourage people to write it down, share it, because similar to the grief and loss healing process, or I should say, it's similar to the trauma healing process in that you have to own what's happening, what has happened, what's currently happening. There has to be a process where you go through it, you own it, you speak it, you share it, someone is witnessing it, where you can feel safe. You can do it in a way where it's safe, not scary, not fully overwhelming you. And that usually happens with doing it in a safe group, having it validated, slowly going through the trauma or the grief and loss, and then usually doing some kind of down regulation process. So deep breathing, slowing down, I'm safe today. Other people's safe eye contact and body language and energy helps down regulate. If you're doing it through a trauma experience, there'd be like EMDR down regulation, somatic experiencing down regulation. These are all ways to calm your body down. And it's important to own these tragedies, grief, loss, trauma, shame stories. And the more you go through them, the more they lose their power, and the strength of the pain and suffering associated with those stories diminish over time. And then the big thing that has to happen in the end is that there has to be a new story created, a story of empowerment, a new narrative around it, a new association. So for some people, it can be, and this is down the line, it might not be for you today or a year from now, that I hear a lot of women say, I'm so sad that this has happened. I'm devastated. I now have a PhD in sex addiction and betrayal trauma that I never ever wish I knew anything about, but I do. And now I can use my stories, what I've learned, to help and support other people. Or I never meant to be a part of this group of women or men who've struggled in this way, but I have met some incredibly strong people. There's a great, profound loyalty and connection and community with these people who have struggled similar to me, and we've been able to show up for each other. So those are all ways that you can never justify or wrap your brain around what's happened to you. Like that's never okay, the way you've been victimized and harmed. Um, but you can make meaning around the way that it's like, and now I know what's happening. And so I'm living in truth. And so I know now what gaslighting looks like and manipulation, and I will never be exploited again. And I didn't realize that I didn't know how to hold boundaries, or I didn't realize I had to, or what those look like. And now I do. And I'm now working towards those things. So it's just narratives like that. And the final part is that if your goal is to work towards forgiveness, I put an emphasis on choice. You get to choose to move towards forgiveness, because sometimes you're just not there, and that's okay. In order for the forgiveness to happen, you have to first fully move through the grief and all the loss of the hopes and dreams and the trust and the former reality that you once had. That all has to be fully mourned before you can forgive and move into this new reality. For you've absorbed this new framework into your heart and soul, and then you can view your partner in a different way. So these are just a few things that I want you to remember about grief and loss, that just little pointers to recall for yourself, or just keep in mind. We need to fight the urge to compare losses. So perhaps when you're sitting in the community and you hear someone's story that doesn't seem that bad, you have to fight the urge. We as humans like to really just pick through similarities and dissimilarities, and that's just kind of the way our brain works. But we have to fight the urge to do that, because someone's own loss is always their greatest version of loss, right? My loss is my worst loss. And so you can't compare losses and levels of grief. The process of grief, right? You guys have all heard it if you've heard the not David Kessler, but the Kubler-Ross is the DABDA, right? The depression, anger, bargaining, denial, and acceptance. That is not chronological. It's not linear. It doesn't happen all in the same way. It up, down, moved around. It's very scattered. And there's not necessarily a beginning, middle, and end to grief. It's constantly dynamic and changing as you change. So the best example I could think of was when my mom died. There was a loss of losing her, right? There was a process of needing to come to terms with she is not on this earth anymore, and all those things that meant. And then as I became a mom, I had to go through other grief and loss processes around being a mom without my mom, right? So maybe I had processed that I lost her and she wasn't in my life, but then something new and dynamic interrupted that grieving process. And then I had to grieve another dimension of the grief. So that's the best way I can describe the fact that grief and loss is dynamic. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and another man who studies it, David Kessler, he's found that acceptance is not enough, right? So that was the fifth stage. I've accepted, I've come to terms with it. That you have to, again, it's that story of empowerment, the meaning making, finding meaning at the end of it that helps people truly move through the grief. I have here that hearts stay broken. I want to give you all permission to still have broken hearts, to have maybe come to terms with this new life, to come to terms with the fact that this is like your new reality. This is who your partner is. This is who you are. This is where you are in recovery or lack thereof. And your heart can still be broken. And it's okay to give yourself grace on that it's just absorbed as part of your story. It's maybe you don't say, hi, my name's Kristen and I'm heartbroken every freaking day, but it's like, I have a part of me that is walking around and existing all day with a broken heart. The people who've lost the most will say, you don't ever get over it. It doesn't like heal up like a scab where you don't like see it and know it's there. It's you walk around, it's still a wound, it's still broken, and there's still pain and hurt around it, but you've just absorbed it into the rest of you, right? It's that integration. I need to have it just integrated into my story so I don't feel like it's out beyond me and I continue to feel so powerless around it and I've lost choice and context and connection because of it. Something that's really important too that David Kessler says is that grief must be witnessed. So for all of you who are going through this process and you've not shared your story with anyone, I'd really encourage you to see if there's some kind of grief group or somewhere that you can join. Because David Kessler says, each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint. But what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. That does not mean needing someone to try to lessen it or reframe it for them. You'll do that on your own. The need is for someone to just be fully present to the magnitude of the loss without trying to point out that there's some kind of silver lining. And I've said this before, but don't try to judge other people's grieving processes. It's different. It's not linear. Don't judge it. He says judgment demands punishment, which I really love that if the more we judge something, that means we have to kind of punish that person for not meeting that expectation, or we punish ourselves for not meeting that expectation of how we're supposed to be performing. So remember, when you're trying to make meaning from the grief, that you never bypass the pain. You have to let the pain happen. If you can't feel it, then you can't heal it. There doesn't have to be meaning in the loss or death or discovery of the betrayal, but it's just more about focusing on how you respond to it, or how, again, you kind of created new narratives, new associations, new framework in spite of it. Everything doesn't have to happen for a reason. Sometimes that's very upsetting for people to hear that sentence, and that's okay. There's no gratitude that could really be found in that extreme loss, but there might be gratitude about what you learned from it, the support you got as a consequence of it, the ability for you to have a more dynamic sense of empathy and compassion because you've been through so much suffering and struggle and humiliation, etc. So I am going to offer you all a betrayal, trauma, grief, and loss journaling assignment, so to speak. If you want it all written down, what you can do is you can go ahead and email me. Put it in the chat what my email is, kristensnowdenmft@gmail.com. And I'll send it to you in written format. But for now, I'll just talk it out to you. Remember, when doing this grief work, it's like doing trauma and shame work. These are very, very visceral experiences that can and will overwhelm your nervous system. So I always encourage you to do this work with the help and support of mental health therapists, support of healthy people, and take breaks if you need to. Give yourself permission to dip your toe in it, walk away, do it again. And it's not easy work to do. So I'll talk out the betrayal, trauma, grief, loss journal topics. As you explore your relationship with your primary partner, the addiction you've uncovered, the betrayal, trauma you've experienced, and your path toward healing and recovery, please journal on the following topics. What do you feel has been taken from you due to this betrayal? How have you and your loved ones been harmed by this discovery? How do you feel like you've been manipulated at times, abused at times? What hopes and dreams have been ended or broken or shattered because of this? What kind of fears do you find that you have now that you didn't have before? Now look into the relationship and explore the following. What are you realizing are your partner's limitations? What are you realizing are your limitations in this process? And if, when, or ever you're ready to move towards the acceptance phase, many of you won't be there, and that's okay. If you were to move through the grief, what would you feel like you would have to unstick from? Right? So there's this really focus on internally exploring, what do I get stuck on? Things that just keep looping in my head, stories I tell myself, memories. What are you getting stuck on that would have to be processed through? This dream, this idea, a reality, a former reality or framework that no longer exists, but you're having a hard time letting go of that. A way that you wanted to be perceived by other people. I know when I've gone through crisis, I've wanted to be perceived as very emotionally stable and, just able to make really good choices and good coping skills. And I've had to let go of those stories that when stuff gets bad, I don't handle it as gracefully and beautifully as I'd like to. And I have to mourn the loss of not being the person, right? You let go of the judgment of what an emotionally unstable person or someone who's emotionally dysregulated looks like. Would you have to let go of what you thought your life or relationship would look like? Would you have to let go of an idea of the role you thought your partner would play in your life? Now turn your focus towards forgiveness. What does forgiveness even mean to you? What would it even look like if you forgave yourself, forgave another person, forgave your partner? What exactly do you even need to forget? What are the things that you have to forgive yourself for, others, who, what, why? Get very specific. And then focus in on, what is your historical experience with forgiveness? Have you watched other people have major conflict and someone had to forgive the other? Have you watched it in like other relationships being role modeled for you? Have you had to forgive things in your life? Have you struggled with it? When you watch shows about forgiveness or hear stories about forgiveness, what is your experience with those? And again, spend some time with this journaling experience, taking note of your stuck points, stuff that you just keep getting stuck on, that you find yourself continuously asking or being confused about or needing more time around or just feeling so angry, you're just not going to be able to push through this particular thing. Just things that are not sitting well with you. And while you have all those visceral experiences going on in your body, are you able to coincidentally hold space for things that you might also feel grateful for? This is hard because this literally is brain splitting for your brain. We are so good at focusing on our pain and our loss and our trauma, and we put it foremost in our brain because, good stuff doesn't tend to kill us. So our brain is wired to keep us safe and it wants us to pay attention to bad stuff. That's what's going to kill us first. It's a really good exercise while you're processing grief and loss and pain to see if you can also kind of crack open your brain and heart to hold space for some gratitude, not even in the same area. Gratitude that the sun's shining, that maybe I do have financial security, even though I have no other types of security, maybe health, children, job, the holidays, I don't know. But can you work on kind of splitting your brain to hold space for the grief and loss and pain, but also gratitude? We have to kind of work on building up that muscle of two extreme dichotomies. And I'm here to listen to any other comments and questions that you have. So I am going to start with some questions on the Q&A. Feel free to type it in. And the first question is, how can I forgive him when he keeps making new wounds for me? And that would be pretty hard. That's the same thing that I say for clients about working through trauma. It's hard for me to do trauma, heal trauma, help it be reprocessed and kind of packed away into an integrated part of my story. When it continues to be cracked open, I'm re-traumatized. It'd be hard to get someone to feel safe when they're returning to a domestically violent home, or home where there's still discoveries or disclosures going on, trickle disclosures and uncovering things, more lies. That's not usually something that can come to be. You can always do practices of forgiveness on maybe yourself, your expectations, what you hope to be, etc. Next question is there a better time in this journey? Is there a better time in this journey to work on forgiveness? Yeah, when you hopefully will be moving away from the active instability, right? So the active phases of trauma, abuse, neglect, lies, addictive behavior, manipulation, and into a space where either you've created your own stability because maybe your addict didn't want to move to recovery, or you as a couple move to a more stable place where he or she is more in recovery, and you can start processing with that person the grief and the loss, right? If you pay attention to some of the recovery processes, there'll be impact letters and restitution letters, etc. Those are processes of moving towards forgiveness. And someone mentioned, I wanted to say thank you. I wrote my intention today as I give myself permission, and you used that word many times. I feel gratitude for that message. Good. There is a lot of permission that you have to give. And I think one of the biggest ones is permission for the messiness and for it to not be linear. So meaning that there's no beginning and end to it. You will feel like you have worked towards forgiveness and grief, and then something else will crack it open. And you will sometimes feel more despair that you're still not over something. And that'll be almost as heartbreaking as the grief and loss itself. And I just want to give yourself permission to, like, oh yeah, this is how it's supposed to happen. This is the journey. The more I judge it, the more I push back on it, the worse it's going to be. So okay, I'm here now. What do I need to do to feel safe, to forgive, to move? What do I need to acknowledge I'm struggling with, I'm grieving? My healing and grief work have been interrupted because my husband had a heart attack on December 2nd. I'm very sorry. And then had a quadruple bypass surgery. So yes, another crisis, obviously. I have to put my impact letter work on hold so that he can heal and doesn't have a high degree. So he's not exposed to being upset at this time and affect his health. How do I move through impact grief under these conditions? This is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with, right? Like health crises matched on top of emotional and addiction crises. It would probably be similar to, again, if there was some kind of, emotional impasse that he was coming to. He's obviously under a lot of physical struggles. So yes, maybe doctors are encouraging you to not put him through some kind of stress. I would want to check in with doctors though, and therapists and professionals, and just kind of check in with how long that healing process is going to be, and check in with yourself, your nervous system. Can you handle putting this on hold with him, but maybe do this processing and prepare these letters and speak them out with the Weetonglen community, or if you do 12-step recovery groups with, or your therapist. You don't necessarily have to put your work on hold because your partner needs to take like a mental health and physical break. And I'd certainly be asking when he's ready to start having those conversations, because they still need to be had. Obviously safely, but they need to be had. Whew, lots of questions. All right. What are your thoughts on couples grieving their losses together, especially if both want to move forward into a new marriage? Any tips on doing this? Um, yeah. So obviously, your partner might be grieving things as well, definitely grieving the way that he may have showed up in a relationship and that he wasn't the person he hoped he'd be. But yes, in any kind of marital dyad, it takes two, right? Like I always tell clients, you can have marital discourse, marital conflict. That's a me and you problem. But your lying and cheating and betrayal and stepping out of our relationship, that's a you problem. So as long as the addict wants to process marital discourse and conflict and struggle, that's fine. I don't really ever want your addict blaming or saying that any of his poor choices outside the relationship were because of you, so just be careful with that. um any tips on doing this together? Yeah, so just kind of maybe writing those journaling things, and have both of you focus in. There's impact letters too. I feel like the impact and restitution, and those are helpful guides, to learn how to be doing these kind of letters to be sharing with each other. Can you explain more why we have a hard time being relaxed and experience joy after betrayal, even with others, not just with your addict partner? Because our brain is lazy. Our brain holds on to scary stuff and it wires into our brain permanently. And the system, this back caveman system that's in charge, is highly effective at arousing you and getting you upset and getting you fearful and getting you hypervigilant, but all horrible, archaic at saying which thing you should be worried about. So that is why we have, I mean, in that loss group that we did last week, several of them mentioned is, I can't even be in a group of women now because what women wear upsets me. Or I wonder if all of these men are sex addicts, as we generally apply our reality, our experiences, our fears, our traumas to everybody else. So that's another thing that just really has to be acknowledged, right? That I find myself distrusting everybody. That needs to be worked through, because there's definitely people who are untrustworthy. Not everybody is untrustworthy. Many people have addiction issues. Everyone does not have addiction issues. They're very different, like, realities. But our brain, you have to spend a lot of time and energy, blood flow, oxygen to expand your brain, right? Take it out of the efficient but very dumb part of our brain and bring it into our extremely inefficient but highly executive, smarter part of our brain so we can figure out what reality is. Keep rolling them in. Let's see how we're doing with time. Okay. How do we explain to loved ones or addicts that this healing isn't linear or fast? I feel the expectation is that I should be okay now. I hear this all the time. You are not alone. I think, I hear Scott Brassert's voice in my head that it's like your addict has known for years that he has been acting out. So when he finally gets caught or comes clean, he's kind of ready to be like, oh, okay, yeah, so here's 20 years of, poor judgments and bad behaviors. There it is. Okay. So he's like ready to move on. He thinks he came clean. It's time to move on because he's like released his demons, so to speak. I'm in recovery now. I swear I'm being honest now. I'm now doing all the things that you wanted me to do. You should be okay now. So it takes a lot of education, which is why, I love the sexandrelationshiphealing.com work groups that the men do. They're so important because they are trying to build up that extremely weak muscle in their body called empathy and compassion. Addicts struggle with that. They've spent a lot of their life like this, focusing in just on their stuff, their struggles, numbing, seeking intensity, their own perspective, and they struggle with empathy and compassion. And so they've got to do these men's groups, these sex addiction recovery groups, 12-step meetings, because people down the line in their own recovery will be like, look, come to us to complain, come to us if you want the high five for your 30 days of sobriety or your 6 months of sobriety. Your partner is reeling over the years and years and years of lying and deceit. And that's going to take a long time. So buckle up. This isn't going to be a tomorrow thing. And by the way, the more you push back at her and judge her process and tell her how she's doing it wrong, the worse it's going to get. So it's just a lot of education that is required. Keep coming with the questions. Okay. When waiting for formal therapeutic disclosure, what advice can you give to a partner? How to find safety when you know the disclosure is coming? I am already grieving, but also waiting for a new bomb to be dropped. Any guidance? I know that's got to be so terrible to kind of just be waiting for the next shoe to drop. Well, you have to check, you have to do a reality check and say, are you currently in danger? There's the difference between finding out things that happen in the past versus finding out, current things, which I don't know the answer to that. So I guess you kind of have to take that as it comes. And what I always encourage clients to do is you don't know if your partner's ever going to recover. You don't know what their process is going to be. So I know this is hard because they're your life partner, but you have to try to seek safety and stability out beyond just your primary relationship. So that is why communities like Weetonglen is so important, sexandrelationshiphealing.com, various 12-step communities or pro-dependency, because you're going to have to find the safety and stability from other people while you kind of assess what your partner's recovery is going to look like. And so it is hard for you to find safety in your current relationship without the disclosure, without going through that process, without kind of stepping back and seeing, is he a willing partner? Is there accountability? Is he being humble and owning truly what he's done? Is he responsive and willing to sit there with you through this process and help you feel safer? That's unknown yet, it sounds like. So you need to kind of find that elsewhere and see what happens with him. I fear that if I show my husband joy and lean in, that he'll forget the pain and hurt he's caused, or that he'll become complacent in his recovery work. That's a very, very common concern as well, and that's okay. I just always say, speak it. The story I tell myself when I'm laughing with you right now at dinner is that you're going to think everything's okay and that you need to stop doing your work. But it's really important for your brain, and quite frankly, for his brain, to be able to split in two, like I'd said early, and hold space for the fact that I'm still so angry with you and I'm grieving and you scare the heck out of me still. But we are still capable of having reparative moments of laughing about something or moments of safety. Deb Dana, who does a lot of work with making your nervous system feel safe again, through the polyvagal theory, she calls them glimmers. And these little glimmers of hope or safety or moments where you feel okay, those are actually really important. So you don't want to like just totally expose yourself to your partner if he hasn't really proven that he's safe and consistent and I guess worthy of you feeling safe with him. But you don't want to quash those glimmers of hope, of joy, of vulnerability. But do add in the story I tell myself is I'm having a great time with you, but I'm so afraid of you thinking this means you're like off the hook and everything like and you'll stop doing your work. Because then hopefully you can engage in conversation with him where hopefully he would say like, no, 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 I'm enjoying this time with you too. I'm still going to do all my work. Then you can maybe truly enjoy that moment even more. Okay. Okay. My sex addict husband will not seek recovery, and we are now heading toward a divorce. I'm very sorry. I am certain that I want a divorce. Grief has been the hardest emotion for me in this process. But every time I start to feel my grief, I start to also miss him. Sometimes I feel that the overwhelming grief keeps me from proceeding with the divorce. How can I work on feeling my grief but continue to move forward? I like to encourage clients to be very specific. Um, I hear what you're saying is that the grief and loss and sadness cause you to also miss him. But I want your whole brain, right? Not just back there, but your executive functioning brain to own the whole story. So you might need to kind of write these almost like pros and cons of like things that I will miss him, right? The loss of if and when I do divorce him, but the pros, right? Because then I'm guessing it'll be like no more needing detective work or getting nervous every time I see the computer open and wondering if I should be hunting, being triggered every time I see him looking at his cell phone because I'm wondering what he's looking at, being triggered by blocked phone calls, right? And kind of write out the things that you're really owning the way that you will miss him. You are a human who loves another human. You're not a robot. So there's absolutely elements of your partner and your partnership that you will grieve and miss. And so we mentioned, give yourself permission. Don't judge the fact that you'll miss him. It's practically impossible to hate and be angry at all of him. You will love and miss parts of him, but you are angry and hate or will not forgive or will forever struggle with these other parts of him. And those just both need to be acknowledged and processed. I'd also encourage you speaking them out to other people. What suggestions or resources do you suggest for adult children dealing with loss and grief as they are impacted by a father? Oh, there's a lot. Well, so I'd start writing out, journaling what you've lost because of this betrayal. I guess uncovering them, right? It's going to be for a adult child dealing with a loss and grief, who you thought your father was, who you thought your father, there's a lot of kids that I've met that they question, why they took them to that baseball game or to that outing because they wondered if they were like more focused on acting out and they use them, as an acting out process, or, that they question their father's love for them or devotion to them because they seem to be making choices around addiction that just doesn't make sense. So things like that. It's a little bit different than the partner of a sex addict, but nonetheless, there's still a lot of grief and loss of normal, loss of what I thought my family would be, loss of all those things that I originally listed, memories, occasions, locations. And then also for you, because you're the adult, how you feel like it might have impacted the way you view normal, who you find yourself attracted to, your relationships or the way you show up in relationships, etc. Those are all important. And suggestions or resources for adult children. There is, I've heard really great things about ACA, the adult children of addicts, 12-step communities. And I bet they cover a lot of this stuff, this kind of grieving process. You guys are doing a great job asking questions. I'm struggling with the fact that my husband is trying to be accountable for his harm and addiction, but he falls back to the same idea of his trauma led him to it. I'm all about having compassion for his childhood trauma, but sometimes it feels like that's what makes him feel better about it, for the lack of a better phrase. Mind you, he will apologize and be empathetic to me, but I'm not sure true accountability is happening in regards to admitting it was his choice, trauma or not. Right. I think the saying, if you listen to any of my my YouTube videos, are uh, hurt people. And what do I also say? Pain that's not transpired or something. Pain that's not transformed is transmitted. Those are two sayings that I kind of say to say, look, it's people who are in pain that are doing really bad choices. But that second saying, the pain that's not transformed is transmitted, is also, there has to be this ownership as well. As I had opportunities to transform my pain, right? Maybe my dad was an addict, and instead of me doing the work to feel the pain and know, oh God, I never want to be like that, and I'm suffering so much with my dad's like emotional absence or the choices he's making, or hearing my mom and dad fight about it every night. Instead of taking that pain and letting it transform my heart to be a better person, I'm now letting it transmit to my wife with my own poor choices. So it is a process. Remember, grief is not a linear process. So he might be in that, like, I'm in so much shame that I'm just trying to like pull myself up just ever so slightly out of my shame swamp, to like take a deep breath and be like, I am not my trauma. My trauma does not define me. I made really bad choices because of my trauma. But there's gotta, obviously, like you're saying, be evidence that he is still staying fully accountable. You know, I still had a full executive functioning part of my brain that I chose not to use. I made commitments and promises and broke them. I had choices to come clean, but I did not. Um, I had many opportunities to stop. I saw the pain I was causing you, and I didn't. And I had many opportunities to make different choices and say, oh, this is hurting other people. But I said, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. So it's a really delicate balance between acknowledging that you made these choices because hurt people, and pain that's not transformed is transmitted, but those aren't excuses. They're reasons, right? As Tammy Verhelst would say, they're reasons, they're not excuses. So it's a push and pull process. I am grieving the loss of my 40-year marriage, the man I thought he was, but is not. He betrayed me financially during the divorce and lies to our adult sons and others. No remorse he acted out since dating. My nightmares are terrible, grieving what could have been in our golden years. We planned for 40 years. So much loss. EMDR may help, but he acted out in serious ways I have fear around, not processed yet. How do I unravel all of this? The grief is so heavy. It absolutely is. Um, I had a client who's been working through her grief and loss of sex addiction and just addiction, substance abuse addiction as well, from her partner. And she was saying the other day, the more I write these type of journals, these grief impact letters, pain, etc., the more I share them in my 12-step groups, the more I share them in my grief groups, the more charge is removed from it. So I used to bawl my eyes out and not be able to finish sentences. When she just did this grief group, she was really proud of herself that she was able to like say the story and stay connected with the story, but not crumble during her story. And she shared that as kind of like a testament to other people who are just starting their grief journey, and letting them know, like, the more you spend time with this, the more it does become absorbed into you, and it doesn't just seem like you're constantly surrounded by this pain and the grief and the loss. I'm EMDR certified. I am a fan of EMDR, have seen it help because like now you're saying if you are leaving the 40-year marriage, you can hopefully create a space of at least not instability, maybe not necessarily full stability right now, but not constant instability. And that would be a good opportunity for you to be exploring this stuff with EMDR. There's other trauma treatments, IFS, somatic experiencing, etc. I'm personal fans right now of EMDR and IFS, internal family systems. EMDR is eye movement sensitization and reprocessing. Last question, 2 minutes left, perfect timing. My addict husband has been in recovery for just over a year, but he still can't hear me talk about my grief and pain without falling back into defensiveness and anger. I feel like he can't be there for me with empathy, and I still have a ton of grief over dealing with 4 affairs in our 19 years of marriage, some details I just recently found out about. He says the experts say I should be sharing my pain with a support group or therapist and not with him. But if we can't ever share our feelings with each other, how do I ever heal together? I agree with you. There is something profound about sharing. Well, first of all, addicts usually have a very low pain tolerance. So they've done what they've done because they cannot sit with uncomfortable feelings. So showing your partner, right, the addict showing their betrayed partner that I can sit with your sadness, your grief, your loss, your anger, and like build a tolerance for it, make healthy choices around it. That alone makes your betrayed partner feel safer. But there's something very profound about sharing your pain, your story, your pain, your loss, your struggle, but having your addict partner stay, having them hug you while you're crying, weeping with you. Those are all opportunities for healing. And again, maybe if you're with like a CSAT or well-trained sex addiction therapist or someone who works in betrayal trauma and can really help your addict partner know what the recovery process looks like. There's a reason why the standard protocol for sex addiction recovery is to, slowly work towards writing a full disclosure, the betrayed partner writing an impact letter, which again is the grief and loss, which you've lost, the addict writing some kind of form of like a restitution letter, what they're going to do to try to help you feel safe, the boundaries, consequences, all that kind of stuff. It's just it's actual structural, as close as we can get to creating some kind of structural safety. And the other part is to actually just sit with each other through it can be very healing. You're creating new wiring in your brain that your partner's safe to talk about this uncomfortable stuff with, that he has a higher tolerance for uncomfortable feelings, and people who have a higher tolerance for uncomfortable feelings tend to not act out, etc. So that tends to be the process. Okay, so we are at the end of time. And it says, if you have any additional questions, you're welcome to email me. Oh, I did want to finish one more moment. I have a new work group that is starting January 25th. I think there are only like 7 spots left, maybe even 6. I'm offering a coupon for $20 off. It is only good till Sunday though. So you have to go in and register now. All you have to do is when you're buying the Life Anonymous, it's a 10-week program. We're going to be going through my Life Anonymous book. All the participants are female betrayed partners. The hope is that they're going to be further down the line. So maybe didn't just discover the betrayal, because most of the current people that are signed up are further down the line. Some have left the marriage, some are still in the marriage, some are in the recovery process, but they're further down the line and it's not a brand new discovery. Feel free to email me. It's been a pleasure. I thank you so much for the ability to come and be here with you. And we'll be starting up with sexandrelationshiphealing.com, my monthly webinars starting again in January.
Thank you, Kristen. This was awesome. Hope to see you in the new year.
Thanks for your great questions, ladies. You're awesome. Have a great holiday and a great new year.